Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to Yu-Gi-Oh! And video game news. Today is Wednesday, April 12th. Apparently they've updated rewards for the Duel Passes, which would be nice. Certainly, if that would actually end up giving you better rewards. Let's see if we can identify any actual challenge there, or if this isn't more of a case that a new season on the Gold Duel Pass has just started. Yeah, a new season really has just started. So it doesn't look like too much different here. You're still getting ridiculous amounts of crafting points. Well, I have to just really assume that the vast majority of people who play Yu-Gi-Oh! Never engage with crafting points at all. Like, you don't get enough crafting points to really craft even one deck that you would potentially want, even if you could figure out what cards you actually did want. And that's even after a year of this game being out. Like 12 crafting points for level 100 ultra rare crafting points is, even at that, still very low. As for the old gold pass that just ended, we almost certainly already had owned all of that. So we'll go ahead and just purchase this. That way we don't forget about it. And so now we have the gold version of the gold pass. Is it really worth it to buy? Well, the problem with that is probably yes, because you get 700 gems back anyways, as long as you get to level 100, as long as you play relatively frequently. I'm playing every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, for instance. You will get the dual pass done and get your money back. Overall, you're getting 100 ultra rare crafting points, but I think it is very important to highlight that you cannot craft even a single ultra rare card with 100 crafting points. Let's just confirm this here. If I was gonna generate this ultra rare card, oh, I was wrong. I must have skewed my own memory there. 30 crafting points to generate this ultra rare, and I assume it's the same amount to craft any ultra rare, and that there aren't different costs for different cards amongst the ultra rare. So yeah, theoretically, if it only costs 30, getting 100 gives you 3 ultra rare cards, and right now at 415 ultra rare crafting points, I could make 100 cards that were all ultra rares, which would be enough to make at least 2 decks if I knew what 2 decks I wanted to make of complete ultra rares. So I'm in a little bit of better position than I thought I was, but it still does boil down to the if of figuring out what cards you really need or want, or what even the top tier meta deck would look like. Like we've been playing in the past few months, Yu-Gi-Oh! Watching other people play, and I just don't see really a consistent strategy that is being played. If anything, I would say I'm not seeing a lot of Zodiac Tri-Brigade anymore, but it does seem like they've probably done a very good job of balancing out the top tier meta decks to a point where multiple decks are playable. I think I probably messed up here on the Duel Live and probably missed out on one of those. But whatever. because at the end of the last stream I said I was going to watch a Duel live, and I don't think I ever got around to actually watching a Duel live. For the accountability section, I was supposed to get the Maestro RR digital to analog adapter computer device for my car radio, and they said it was delivered, but it wasn't delivered. So much so that I literally have like camera footage of the time they said that they delivered it, and there's nothing there. Nobody ever drove up. So either they delivered it completely to the wrong house, or because it was UPS, and they possibly handed it over to United States Postal Service instead of UPS, which is a private company, to deliver it in the U.S. Postal box, and then just lied about it being on the front door, or clicked the wrong button. It is also not unheard of for package deliverers to straight up lie and say something was delivered in their software and deliver it later. I haven't had a real issue so far of somebody actually delivering it, but it does certainly highlight how Amazon.com, with their own private delivery service, which almost certainly is overworking and underpaying their employees, has kind of improved the parcel package delivery system severely by forcing their employees to take a picture of the package and confirm that it actually was delivered, and by having a real focus on just better service and better quality of service compared to what has been a fairly degrading experience, I think, between UPS and FedEx. Now, I will say United States Postal Service does a pretty good job considering how little they charge for delivering small bits of mail, and for being a government agency that's actually not really subsidized by taxes in any way and is independently profitable somehow. And inherently, the United States Postal Service would be a much better service if there weren't active politicians trying to destroy it and cause it to fail. They've passed specific laws that says the United States Postal Service can't go into new products and new fields. It would make a lot of sense, for instance, if there was a United States Postal Service email address attached to every physical address, and maybe then people could email a house and get into more of that digital realm, which that would be kind of scary, and almost certainly it would be almost 100% advertising at that point. But it does kind of make some sense that you would go more in that digital realm. Yeah. It is weird that most people have email through private companies like Gmail and Hotmail and things like that, AOL, and yet you can't even offer the same option as far as an email. Very specifically, if the post office was allowed to do it, the USPS, like government email addresses and all that server and IT infrastructure could be synergized, I think, a lot better too, instead of having, say, the Veterans Affairs IT department handle Veterans Affairs and the CIA and the White House IT departments handle those .gov and the IRS.gov emails. The USPS could very easily have kind of like secure email communications with government agencies only, and then so you knew you were only talking to government agencies from the United States and not spammers or fakers otherwise. And then certainly there's a lot of low-tech people that don't understand email that could benefit from that service, or people like on food stamps or very low income that could benefit from those kinds of services. People who literally just don't understand or have the mental capacity to read emails, like a premium service that would print out emails and hand it and deliver it like a letter to you would be very valuable to a lot of people. And frankly, if the United States Post Office, and this is a rant that has nothing to do with video games at this point, if the United States Post Office could find more income by giving valuable services, they could get away from finding income from fairly useless services such as basically coupon stuffing and putting a bunch of ads in every single mailbox. But yeah, that's a long rant based on the fact that the Maestro RR device that was supposed to arrive yesterday did not arrive, which just delays me making any progress at all. As far as putting in this new radio in my car, I've also grown some extra fear in that the wiring harness I bought, Amazon literally said it would not work with my car, even though it looks and the connectors all feel and snap in. So I'm wondering if perhaps I bought the wrong wiring harness and there's some wire in there that, in particular the digital ways, like crosses a wire somewhere, and I would just never be able to figure out which wire is crossed or how the appropriate wiring harness should be wired. Which, yeah, that would definitely suck if that turned out to be the case. It would just be a matter of buying the right wiring harness. The order that I bought the Maestro RR from came from Crutchfield, and I spent like $4 short of getting $5 off of the next order from their rewards program. But I would have to say their rewards program really only makes sense if you are just constantly buying car stereo equipment. It is something that would be great if you had a car stereo installation business, which I don't even know how many of those can survive in modern days. But if you're just an individual, you're not going to buy a new radio or new speakers for your car and then end up buying a new radio or new speakers for your car again in the next decade. And I'm sure the reward points expire eventually. So yeah, no progress there. Now I did make progress, video game related wise, in playing Lego DC Supervillains. The game was getting very crashy very fast for a couple of episodes there. And so what I opted to do is run it compatible with Windows 8 instead of Windows 10. And so far it hasn't crashed since then. Now, since Lego DC Supervillains is about the third newest Lego games, but it still is on the old engine of Lego games. Only Lego Star Wars The Skywalker Saga is the rebooted game that I think is on the Unreal Engine. There's a possibility, since it's so new, that the trick that I have been doing as far as disabling full screen optimizations in Windows 10 is not really necessary. So maybe I caused the crashing by disabling the full screen optimizations. Although technically disabling optimizations should not cause a game to just hard crash and close. And it is not a crash, or it's not throwing any errors as far as Windows is catching. It's not saying this game crashed, let's investigate that and send diagnostics to Windows, that annoying little pop-up window that never does really anything. It's just closing it. And it's fairly obvious that it's crashing specifically when something new is being loaded onto the screen or loaded into the video RAM, because you will walk the couple times it crashed, it was right when I was walking to a new area where something new would have been seen. And I also saw some wonkiness and a little bit of stutter in one level where there was just a lot of stuff on screen. These LEGO games, arguably not really optimized for even 1080p resolution, not optimized for PC. There's clearly a issue that should be better optimization, better for PC versions of this game, of the LEGO games, particularly with the Steam Deck. And I would just have to cross my fingers and hope that the LEGO games run on the Steam Deck particularly well with the Proton DB compatibility layer or the Proton compatibility layer and Linux pretending to be Windows in SteamOS. Because the LEGO games in particular are probably about 15 of the top 50 kids games you would want to play from Steam. And the Steam Deck definitely feels like a Nintendo Switch and feels like a device that you would consider giving to kids. Like, I'm heavily considering giving Steam Decks to my nieces and nephews at some point in the future, and we have been basically told there isn't going to be a Steam Deck 2 for a while, so there's not really a reason to hold off from that. Yeah. I think I'm gonna lose here. I could have activated another effect to throw more cards in the graveyard. I might be able to turn this around though. If there's enough cards in this graveyard that I could summon something from. But there doesn't seem like there is. There's enough cards in the graveyard to summon a 2-star or a 2-monster Link summon monster. But yeah, playing LEGO DC Supervillains otherwise, I'm very surprised looking at the achievements that by the 5th of 26 levels, 52% of players had not been able to pass that point. So you're talking 1/5 of the storyline of the game, and most people didn't finish those levels. And it has to almost certainly do with the kind of random ADHD nature of the story they're telling, which they jump between different characters, and there is no main protagonist character you're playing as. They force you to create a custom character at the very beginning of the game, which I think probably was a mistake. And then that custom character should probably have been the character you play play as the default character. This is the character you always start as. Yes, you press the Y button and swap into other characters' bodies and use their abilities, but for the most part, the entire story should probably be shown from the eyes of that custom character. Now, take what I just said and replace custom character with Harley Quinn, and you have even better story, where you start the game playing as Harley Quinn, and you play the entire game through the eyes of Harley Quinn. And that would have been perfectly fine, too. But that's just not what happens. You sometimes play as one group of characters, and then the next level you're playing as a different group of characters, and so you have these parallel storylines in a kid's game, which is too complicated in the first place. On top of which, in between each story mission, you are forced into the hub world and have to drive across the hub world, which is only designed to get you distracted. But even if you were distracted and decided to run around the hub world, you actually would have a fairly terrible time in the hub world trying to collect the extra open world free play stuff, because you haven't unlocked enough characters with abilities to solve a lot of the puzzles. For instance, there's basically only one character that early on you're going to unlock that can deal with plants as a interactive puzzle element. And until you unlock that character, any plant-based puzzle is not going to be solvable in any way unless you've bought DLC, and then you're using the DLC characters. And inherently, even for a Lego game where the DLC is just giving you more minifig characters, it is still spoiling the experience that was originally intended and making it worse. When you compare this to what the original Lego Marvel superheroes game did, where you played as Spider-Man for almost the entirety of the story, or it felt like you did at least, and when you got into the hub world of Manhattan in between levels, they were more walled off special instances of Manhattan. You couldn't just run around all of Manhattan until you'd finished the main story, or most of the main story. So, yeah. I really just don't feel like there was a good experience that they designed. As good of an experience as they should have designed for the game. Well, we have to activate this now, don't we? So I'm just gonna lose a bunch of health. You should have waited until this triggered, so I could have countered this guy's health. So now that this is just going to be around the idea of how many of these can I get on the field. And now, how many can I summon? 1, 2, 3. So yeah, still playing Lego DC Supervillains. There's a couple of Lego movie games in particular that I have just like missed and need to play. So I probably still do have like 4 or 5 Lego games left to play before I'd be caught up to the point of at least the Skywalker saga. That sucked. I got tricked there, or messed up there. Which, if I had understood what this card was, that wouldn't have happened if I knew its effect. Inherently, the music in LEGO DC Supervillains is also getting copyrighted, so playing a lot of LEGO games would not help towards monetization. I think I've crossed the line to 590 subscribers, and it does kind of feel like a small bit of a snowball effect in that I am getting subscribers fairly frequently these days. So it does seem very reasonable to believe that I would be at 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and there's definitely an argument to try to shoot for the beginning of 2024 to be monetized. That way it just is a tax thing. So I don't have like income for 2023 that I might have to claim on taxes. Although, in all fairness, the amount of income probably would be so low it wouldn't matter anyways. And there is still definitely a problem as far as the watch time. Like, I may be getting subscribers, but there has yet to be any kind of snowball effect where subscribers is significantly increasing watch time. My watch time used to be very high because I had 2 or 3 pre-recorded shows that were getting watched fairly well on my channel. And so if, like DC Supervillains, I started to air that like on January of 2024 as a secondary pre-recorded footage on top of a more mature adult game, then I could potentially double the watch time that way. And in a lot of ways, to use a football metaphor that I probably shouldn't use, it feels like 2023 is very much going to be a rebuilding year of just having one pre-recorded footage show air for all of 2023 until I can get caught up again and potentially find free time, which I don't know if I'm ever going to really do that. Like, situations, this medium emergency I'm still kind of in, it's maybe moving slightly towards more of a minor emergency, maybe a lot more permanent, and may take up more of my time, and my insomnia is not getting better, and the amount of energy and motivation I have is not getting any better. So I really have just slowed down on the amount of games I'm playing, and short of having somebody else play the video games and make footage, I don't really have a way to fix that. Interesting. I won by a connection failure when almost certainly I shouldn't have won. And we've already jumped up to level 3 on the duel path. I also should mention that we talked about how Neptunia Sisters vs. Sisters was having its dialogue changed, but on Twitter I couldn't zoom in the picture to see what the actual dialogue was that was being changed. I've got more information around that. They are literally centering themselves, even though they've already been rated for the T for teen by the ESRB. They're centering themselves more to change the dialogue to remove basically cussing. Like BS is being turned into bull in a few instances, and it seems like it may not be that many instances in the first place, but it just seems like it's weird And I almost wonder if some of it isn't perhaps a more accurate translation to what the Japanese dialogue was in the first place. And so, in a funny way, this might be them not as much censoring as undoing previous censorship. In particular, one line was like something along the lines of, "You picked the wrong person to mess with," and they've changed the line to something like "die." And in Japanese, using the phrase "she" to die, depending on how you say it tonally, can be way more insulting and inappropriate than you picked the wrong person to fight with. But would be a phrase that is used a lot more, I think, than "you've picked the wrong person to fight with" too. But it certainly is a weird example of like tone policing, perhaps, or correcting tone. Is a weird example of changing things in general when it seems like the game was already approved, and what I don't see a real reason why you would have changed the dialogue. Yeah, in most cases it barely just turns it down half a notch on the cussing based on the examples they're showing. And really won't majorly affect the outcome of how well Neptunia Sisters vs. Sisters would look or play. I'm gonna destroy this since this is a continuous spell. And that didn't work. But yeah, that definitely is a story that deserved better coverage. We should probably move into the news fairly quickly. Don't think that there's really a ton of new news happening today, but I might be proven wrong on that. So, I was gonna say, I have been toying with the idea of using SteamDB to follow the trends as far as video games every time I run my macro. So here's SteamDB showing the top 100. In reality, the top 20, maybe 25 are games worth talking about. The problem here certainly is when you have Counter-Strike Global Offensive that came out in 2012, being the all-time peak game player, that becomes not that useful bit of information. Like, assume green here is something I own, blue is something in the wish list. Okay. Yeah. This doesn't really help you much on the idea of what are the games that came out in 2023 and all of that. So if I was to make this macro, I'd either try to find a better page. Let's see, filter by tag. Here. That probably wouldn't help me. Filter by category. New all-time peaks. Might be a category worth considering. Yeah, there's not a filter here. New all-time peaks might be the best. It's actually play a way to see something new, but it's probably not going to be too much new. Let's go ahead and get rid of this, and then get rid of this. And see if we can turn this around on us. New all-time peaks, though, also is not going to be that useful. So it seems like it's going to be somewhat of a complicated problem, in that I'm going to have to find something that either find a different data source than SteamDB, or find something in SteamDB that darn it. I don't think anything's gonna stop this from happening. I should have destroyed this card. Yeah, looking at like new all-time peaks, these don't feel like the games that should be on the same list. Tron Identity is an interesting game in that it's a visual novel around Tron Legacy, and that they're planning on making a bunch more, and that they're somewhat successful. It did occur to me as I was playing Lego DC Supervillains that there is this idea, certainly, where comic books could become visual novels. And honestly, Marvel and DC might make as much money, if not more, if they did release their monthly comic stories as visual novels instead, and embrace digital distribution that way. But that is just one of many technologies that have not been embraced. But yeah, the vast majority of this category of games only might give me a data point as far as games to make YouTube shorts around. Yeah. And so if I just click charts, I think this brings me back to that same thing. So inherently, what I'd have to do is make the macro, click on this, or pull this information here as far as the release date, and then I would have to filter severely out anything that is not released, say, in the last 6 months, as far as these are the new and trending games that people are talking about. Otherwise, the idea of trying to have a better understanding of what games people are playing really is just going to constantly fall down to Counter-Strike Global Offensive and Dota. Like, those fan bases are very strong and very consistent, and it's unlikely to change. The source software development kit really not a game at all, so you might have to make a custom filter to eliminate that. But like, looking at this, FIFA 23 is, and Football Manager 23 is both examples of games that should be talked about, even though they're technically not released in 2023. They were released in like the last 6 months, and so they are within that 6 week to 6 month launch window point where they have some major relevancy, or more accurately, they're within the yearly launch window of games that are somewhat new and should be focused on. That being said, like most of these games are old and not mentally in the same category. It's like Resident Evil 4 here is the only new game, and Hogwarts Legacy is the only new game that really makes a lot of sense to be on the list as far as things people are playing that is new. Inherently, what I'm trying to get at is a list in my mind of these are the games that are continuing to make the video game infrastructure and economy succeed. Because if people are just playing old games, then that's not going to really motivate game developers, to make new games. Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel is a live service game, so it too potentially would be filtered out because it came out January 2022, which is more than a year ago. But it is getting constant updates, so that system would also be an issue. And like Cyberpunk 2077 still being played. I guess inherently what we would want to do, and I'd have to think about this, is maybe you just grab all of these with every time I run the macro, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I grab the list here, the order here. I assign like 100 points to Counter-Strike Global Offensive because it's in the first spot. I give 1 point to Divinity Original Sin 2 because it's in the 100th spot, and just like same 2 points for F1. And then that creates this weighted list for that sampling that then gets added to the next sample. So Friday I would run the macro again, theoretically, if the macro was made, and then I would add to those points, and then that would create a list that at the end of the year very possibly would have, say, somewhere between 300 to 1,000 games on it. At most, I would say 1,000 that is weighted, and from that I could scroll down through that list and get a general idea of what the most played games were that year. And we could try definitely to pull the release date information, and at some point maybe we would filter from that bigger list a smaller list. That's the better way to do it, frankly, is to have one Excel sheet that has all the most played games over the course of the year, and then a secondary Excel sheet that filters it to games released in the last 12 months, and then that would be a shorter list. Yeah, I think this is doable. Is it going to be easy? No. Is it going to just be something I could tell ChatGPT to do? No, probably not. Although eventually we probably will get an AI that is smart enough to be able to continuously filter a website as a data source, chart as a data source. But yeah, it definitely seems like that's doable. Now I just need to find free time and ambition to make a macro that would do that, and put it into like a Google Sheets Excel type document, which is the default way I make any kind of documents, is use Excel, don't use Word. In this case, because it is a chart in the first place, using Excel, which is a chart spreadsheet software, makes all the sense in the world. But generally, if you were going to write an essay and you put it in Excel and you had a column for the subject and the verb and the pronouns and action verbs, and you were breaking apart the sentences that way, I think that would still be somewhat interesting to read. Alright, let's move on. ScumVM is now looking for people to test the Vampire Diaries and Nancy Drew's Secrets Can Kill. These are her interactives. I believe Secrets Can Kill is the first Nancy Drew game, and like the first 3 Nancy Drew games in particular were not, I think, particularly well received. I actually own quite a few of the Nancy Drew games and was going to try to play through them, but the first one was pretty awful. And it generally is just kind of a long games. Simplistic games for little kids. I don't know the Vampire Diaries directly. As far as what game that is. The name sounds familiar, but I'm trying to click on a link to see anything. Yeah. Apparently, it is a full motion video game made by Her Interactive, by the look of this video. Yeah. That is definitely not one I recognize as an old game. Part of why I didn't make as many Lego DC Supervillain episodes as I would have liked is because the game crashed. I needed to like stop the recording and start another recording and merge them together, and then I needed to basically upload that video to YouTube just to make sure that the merged video is playable and viewable, because yeah, it can get a little wonky when you merge 2 videos together. With the software I'm using, at least. There is possibility out there that I should use better software, and newer versions of OBS, when I feel like they're stable, will potentially change a lot of that too, as far as the fragmented MP4 format support. You get into this weird position, or I get into this weird feeling, certainly, where a lot of times it doesn't even feel like you really need to win when playing Yu-Gi-Oh! It's just like, if you do anything, you'll eventually get all the daily quests done, and that's often feels like it's good enough. Alright, let's start going through the video game news. The Nintendo Live Fan Fest is coming to the US this year. The event will take place in Seattle in September. Seattle is very close to Redmond, Washington, which I think is really just a like subsection of Seattle. So, and that's where Nintendo of America is, which that in particular highlights a potential new trend in that if Nintendo starts to have Nintendo Live Fan Fests in its backyard, then Microsoft may very well take that same idea, and we will potentially see Microsoft having live Fan Fest type things, E3 replacement type things happen in Seattle, also outside of Vegas. Which, yeah, there is really a great argument to not have any events in Vegas at all if E3 is dead, but that does then eliminate a central location. It's going to be a very hard push for to convince, say, Sony to have an event in Seattle, since Sony is not in Seattle. And that definitely would be the next step, if you were going to have a central location, is to try and get Sony to also show up. It doesn't make a lot of sense though to have an event in California, because that's just going to be as expensive as having an event in Las Vegas, and it arguably opens up the door to a central location of events happening somewhere like in Germany at Gamescom, or even in Tokyo at the Tokyo Game Show. Without having a central location where pitches could be made, though, you're definitely creating a weirder balance of events where game developers potentially are not going to have a central place to go to make pitches for new games from publishers, and so potentially something like GDC, despite the apparent controversy happening around GDC now, GDC may be the place where game developers in particular go to make pitches. Or game pitches are made over something like Zoom, and I'm not sure that's going to be great for game developers if you have to pitch over Zoom. That does also bring about some questions as far as Alice Asylum and American McGee just being out of the video game at this point, and Alice Asylum being a total failure and feeling very much like it was a scam even from the beginning that had very little chance of ever being approved by EA. But it is very strange that this pitch for Alice Asylum, American McGee's Alice Asylum, as a third game to the Alice series, was done so incredibly publicly and funded so much by like Kickstarter, and that the pitch was not put out or given to E3 at an event in face to face at something like E3. Now, arguably, maybe the pitch was supposed to be at E3, but not really, because that design Bible was ready to go around January, and he put it out publicly around January. So it just really feels like he did not do things in the way things would have been done if you really were likely to have a game pitch picked up. You would have done it in secret at E3, meeting in hotel rooms with publishers to make the game pitch. You would have pitched Alice Asylum as this kind of game, and you would pitch it as Alice Asylum to EA, who owns the rights to Alice Asylum, but you would have pitched it as a more generic game to other publishers, because there's really nothing stopping you from making a game that's just not so much based on Alice in Wonderland and isn't Cold Alice, but still has the same gameplay elements. Now, arguably, even in the design Bible, I don't know if the design and game elements are particularly that good. They're kind of old-fashioned ideas and ways of doing things. As far as like a 3D platforming game, which they just don't make those anymore. Yeah, and even American McGee, he was doing this like pirate game jam. And the pirate game jam also would have been a place where he might have made pitches to publishers, if there were any publishers at the pirate game jam, which I don't think there really would have been. Although I don't know if he really did a pirate game jam this year or even last year because of the pandemic. But yeah, if I was developing a game, I definitely wouldn't show 99% of the ideas online for anybody to steal and beat them to market with. I wouldn't put out a pitch just because it's January 1st and put that game design Bible pitch idea out to Kickstarters or hand it to just one publisher, EA. Like, EA has obviously not really cared about the Alice series and doesn't really want to do anything with it. So he definitely should have built in contingencies, and it just doesn't seem like that's the case at all. And so it definitely comes off as just poorly handled or scammy, take your pick. Anyways, I'm kind of ranting about what I had already said before, though. As far as this Nintendo Live Fan Fest goes, though, it'll include gameplay opportunities, live stage performances, gaming tournaments, photo ops, and other activities. It doesn't seem to really promise any new announcements or anything like that. I imagine there might be something. In a lot of ways, this perhaps highlights where the split should happen, and the E3 should probably be more like PAX, or that there should just be events like this that are fan fests and just aren't going to have any new content. It's just like, here's a festival. Do you want to go to a Renaissance festival, or do you want to go to a video game festival? Take your pick. Or yeah, I don't know if that's going to particularly work very well either as far as a fan festival, particularly for Nintendo. Going to something like PAX or EVO and playing Smash Brothers in secret is probably going to be better than going to a Nintendo Fest that's going to severely limit you down to playing the games they want you to play. And so you're highly unlikely to see any old games here. And you can see their target audience here is, you have very young kid, older teenage kids, maybe some young parents here, but very young kid here, and Mario and Luigi in costume characters. So this is not really a festival that feels like it's targeted towards your average 25-year-old gamer. Okay, so I think what I have to do here with this setup is probably summon this and then immediately summon this. because I can only summon 2 things. Yeah. So then I have to attack because I can't do anything more. And then I can't summon Zeus. Well, they've got me here. The summon limit card is perhaps one of the first cards that I would actively consider playing. A Dark Magician summon limit card with Magician Salvation Field spell. Yep. Let's see. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says the PlayStation 5 and Hogwarts Legacy helped UK Q1 game and console sales rise year over year. So, yeah. There's a mobile phone Harry Potter game that they're starting to promote a little bit too. So, seems like they are once again going to succeed in making Harry Potter games. There's definitely enough room there to pretty much always make Harry Potter games. And I kind of do expect them to make Harry Potter remake Lego games in that same vein, assuming that AT&T, as the parent company of Warner Brothers in TT Games, allows them, funds them to do that. But there is definitely a lot of pressure that kind of needs to happen around the Lego game remakes anyways, because they need to churn those out. They all need to be great quality as remakes, but they need to churn them out fairly quickly too. Some of the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit games maybe they won't have the license for, so those may not get remade. And the Ninjago games could probably be left on the cutting room floor as far as making remakes. But everything else, maybe the Lego movies you skip. Lego Dimensions would be a rough one to remake. Lego Universe they can skip. But yeah, pretty much everything else. Lego Indiana Jones game should be in the works right now for a new Indiana Jones movie coming out. And definitely they should merge the idea down to one game, because very consistently it's been a problem where you have Lego Indiana Jones 1 and then Lego Indiana Jones 2 is sold, so they're double dipping and charging twice as much as they really should for a lot of the Lego games. So that just merging them together in Harry Potter years 1 through 4 versus 5 through 7, if that becomes remastered and released as one game, that would in itself be better and reduce the amount of remakes they have to make. But they do kind of have to have a new remake every year, otherwise the Lego games are going to feel like they're falling behind to now a growing number of competitions, in that 2K also has a Lego game in the works, and at any point Lego might pull the license and then TT Games has nothing. And they can't really make a kid game that feels like a Lego game without Lego characters in it very easily. Alright. So unless this one of these 2 traps does something for him, I may have won here. Let's see. Here's the story I was talking about. Bithell Games is working on more Tron games. The studio's visual novel Tron Identity is released today. I heard this game isn't particularly long, but you know, that may not be too much of a problem. As long as the price is right on it, having shorter visual novels could potentially take the idea of a visual novel and introduce it or reintroduce it to the Western world, which is less likely to want to read as much as, say, a Japanese visual novel fan might be interested in it. In particular, if my idea of making visual novels based directly off of the monthly releases of, say, Batman comics were to be made, there's about 16 pages of pictures in a monthly floppy Batman comic. Let's just say 16 as a number, that's about right. And in that, you're going to have a bunch of pictures, but probably no more than, I would say, 100, just to pick a nice round number. So that would be an incredibly small visual novel with no branching at all. It would just be a kinetic visual novel, at least to start. So how do you really monetize that? You definitely sell it on the DC name and the Marvel name, whichever ones you're making. You definitely try to make it more of a probably ad-based thing where you try to get people to sign up for the actual physical prints still, or you run advertisements otherwise. In a lot of ways, since Disney owns Marvel, if there were literally just Disney Plus commercials that you had to watch in between each page turn in a kinetic visual novel, that might be profitable enough for Disney to go down that route. Like, ideally you would want a single app that has all your comic books, and I don't know if it needs to really be a website, so not something like Comixology. Jellyfin, which is kind of a new contender in the streaming server to replace things like Plex, has support for comicrack.xml info files and comic books in general. So there's potentially, if you were trying to do it yourself, you would use something like Jellyfin. Of course, then you have to get the comics, and that's going to take a massive amount of hard drive space and a lot of pirating of the comics to get it from scanners who scan the physical comics into a digital format. It's ridiculous that that's really, at least for old comics, the way things would be done. There is another server software that is trying to be developed to be a more custom, thus having more features server to kind of replace something like Comixology, but have your own local server. But neither one of those would ever be easy to build or use compared to just Marvel or DC making their own platform and putting it on Steam. And I don't think this would be a case where Valve would say, no, we don't want to get into the comic book region or field, particularly if you're just selling them as kinetic visual novels. I think Valve would be fairly okay with that, at least for Marvel and DC. Now, if you started to add a bunch of comics from other people, I could see it going in weird directions. More mature comics might not be as welcome. Something like Ogloff, or Ogloff, I don't know how you pronounce that, which is an adult comic strip. That digitally coming to Steam might be a little bit more problematic. I think we should probably just win on this and call it a day as far as playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Or, yeah. There definitely are some more indie, mature things that have a lot of nudity and sex and violence and things that maybe Valve wouldn't want to see a bunch of kinetic visual novels around those concepts. Although, in fairness, there's already a bunch of visual novels around those concepts, you know, on Steam, so it'd be kind of hypocritical for them to say. But yeah, it would have to be really, really cheap, like 69-cent DLC for each issue, which wouldn't be anywhere close to what Marvel and DC would want to play. I guess I'm gonna have to play some more. I really didn't get all the daily quests done today, did I? Destroy a card and Pendulum Fusion Summon 2 more times, which I don't do that too much of that. Plus, playing some more today is fine because that, as long as we're somewhat winning, we can work our way up the ranks and work our way up the duel pass. So, suffice it to say, my hopes are fairly high that this succeeds more to like a surprising amount as far as the Tron identity game, so that people, Disney in particular, owner of Marvel, might say that there is actual value in licensing out things to make visual novels. Moving on, Resident Evil Death Island trailer shows Leon and Jill working together for the first time. The animated film comes to Japan in July and will be released worldwide by Sony Pictures. And see, here we can see a Leon that honestly doesn't quite feel as in line with the Leon for Resident Evil 4 that was just released. And then Jill looks pretty much like Jill from RE3. And then you have the girl, I think, from Resident Evil 0. And I would have to assume this is a lady from Resident Evil 1 or 2. So, yeah. This idea, I guess maybe I won't show the trailer just so it doesn't get copyrighted claimed, of Jill and Leon fighting together might give a it might give a hint as the idea that they're going to change things in the Resident Evil 5 or 6 remakes and go in different directions. It might be a good way to wonder if that's how they're going to correct past mistakes as far as RE 5 and 6. It makes a note here that Leon was playable in Resident Evil 2, 4, and 6, and Jill was playable in 1, 3, 5, and Revelations. Looking at the animation here, it looks alright, not anything super amazing. It, in a lot of ways, feels like it will be on the level, if not slightly better, than some of the Netflix Resident Evil animated shows. But from the level of animation I'm seeing here, I'm not expecting too much. This feels somewhat silly, somewhat cartoony, and yes, Resident Evil is silly and cartoony, but I feel like you probably want to try to make it more serious when making a movie version of it, even though that's not really what they've done up until this point, even in the live action movies. But the live action Resident Evil Netflix series is already forgotten about at this point. Yeah. In a lot of ways, I probably am wrong in my mentality that it should be serious. I think probably in the minds of Japanese fans and people who have been long-term Resident Evil fans, they know that it's always a campy game, and so maybe even in the movies it should be campy and silly. But if it is going to be campy and silly, then I feel like I'd much prefer to actually control the action and be doing the crazy, silly action stuff instead of just watching it. Particularly if it's not live action and it's just animated. Yeah, having just watched all of the trailer there's nothing there that feels amazingly interesting. That being said, there might be some massive success in that the COVID lockdown may be lifted in Japan just as this movie comes out, so people may be in Japan desperate to watch it. They're desperate to watch any movie, so it might have some pretty big success that way. Yeah, and inherently, I think they just are always trying to make the Resident Evil series a much bigger multimedia thing than it really can be. It works well enough when you have a good video game, but that's about all you can do with it. You can't go further than that and try to have movies and TV around it and expect that to really succeed. You probably could do comic books if comic books sold, or mangas, but I don't think there actually is even a Resident Evil manga that has been released anytime recently. There probably was one many years ago. And you see that certainly in the video games too, the desire to have multiplayer elements and microtransactions and throw other ridiculous elements into the well, as far as just different things labeled Resident Evil. Okay, we'll summon this, then we'll activate this, and then we'll bring this, and then a special summon this. That takes that, then that, and then that. The idea, though, of Death Island, looking at the trailer, potentially being more what they do with Resident Evil 5 in particular, might be a good idea. Getting away from Chris being the main character, or getting away from Sheva being a character at all, and the getting away from the story being set in Africa for Resident Evil 5. Although, in all fairness, if they're going to remake Resident Evil 5, they're going to just have to say, we're going to try and do this much more respectfully this time, or we're gonna try to do this with let fewer people trying to cause controversy. Like, honestly, I don't think it was incredibly poorly designed Resident Evil 5. There was just people causing controversy for not really great reasons. And the bigger complaint about Resident Evil 5 being set in Africa and introducing Sheva is it's just introducing a character that never goes anywhere and introducing an environment that is just out of place compared to the other locations. For the movie in particular, and I'm probably rambling too much and talking about each news story too much, but heck, it's real opinions, so we'll stick with it. When you get to Resident Evil 7, that's when you get the real seriousness. And if I was going to make a Resident Evil movie, I would probably try to do a live action movie that is built around Resident Evil 7. And it would try to be a real horror movie that actually scared people, not making an animated movie. If I had to make it animated, I'd still probably go with the animation style of Resident Evil 7, so it would look very much like the game and tell very similar story to what happens in the game. I wouldn't try to create a new story, a completely new story. Throwing Leon and Jill in the story wouldn't be terrible. You could certainly take the events of Resident Evil 7 and have Leon and Jill return to the house and investigate the monsters in the environment in the house of Resident Evil 7. That might work, or tell an alternate take on it. But yeah, I suppose I do kind of have to show this off as far as this trailer, in that this does just feel CGI-ish and just doesn't really seem like there's too much you really would expect here. If anything, it just kind of looks like a cutscene in a video game. Yeah, and that's Chris over there on the left. Each of these action sequences in particular, though, just are not very interesting when it's animated. It just feels video gamey. I'll move the mouse around over this a little bit more. Yeah. It just doesn't really feel like much of anything. Moving on, Media Molecule is ending support for Dreams in September. The game will receive no more updates and players will get a storage limit next month. When did Dreams originally come out? They're gonna face their ending support to focus on an exciting new project which they haven't announced, which really seems to me like they're just abandoning Dreams, because if they had a newer exciting new project and they had announced it and they had released it, then people wouldn't potentially be as upset as I imagine they will be when you're just saying we're ending support. The Dreams concept has always been very pie in the sky as a concept, and frankly, all of these game concepts, when it's you make the game, you make the content, and we've just made this massive infrastructure so that you can make content yourself, have all those types of projects have kind of failed miserably and are ridiculous from the initial conception of an idea. Mario Maker, perhaps the only exception to that rule where Mario Maker does actually kind of work by sheer fandom and by the limited number of resources that Mario Maker gives you compared to overly complicated systems, which I imagine Dreams was. But I feel like Dreams has only been out for maybe 4 or 5 years. There's also going to be a 5 GB limit on their creations, which 5 GB is a decent amount for like one thing, but not they're working on an entirely new project, stressing we're not ready to talk about this yet, but we can confirm it's not Dreams 2 or the Dreams IP. Part of the Dreams IP. Yeah. So Dreams is just being abandoned. The good news, I guess, you could take from that, though, is that I don't think that many people really ever engaged with Dreams or anything like that. So let's see. Moving on, a playable 20-foot Donkey Kong arcade machine is coming to the Museum of Play in New York. Nintendo is assisting with this project. It's ridiculous. As somebody who owns a Donkey Kong console that's not in particularly great shape, I can tell you that the old-fashioned TV tube screen in a Donkey Kong would have been slanted at about this angle, so you would have to be about this tall to see the screen. So I imagine what they're doing is they're just putting a flat screen on this. Scaling up buttons means that almost certainly these buttons would not work in the 20-foot tall version, and they're definitely cutting off the bottom of the arcade cabinet. So what you're really looking at here is a art piece made out of wood with a flat screen TV on it, recreating the art, and that's about it. And then the actual playable stuff is just going to be standard buttons. I don't see real value in this. It's not making much of an artistic statement to my mind that I'm getting. That Donkey Kong is huge, or that it was a very big game, so we've made it physically big. It just doesn't feel like there's a statement here as much as they're just making a giant attract piece to play Donkey Kong, which in fairness I don't even think kids or adults really are going to want to play Donkey Kong that much. Perhaps the Museum of Play needed something to keep the little kids distracted, but that's why you generally would just want an arcade with a real regular Donkey Kong cabinet in it and many other games, or you even have an emulated like MAME cabinet type things in the arcades to keep kids busy if they're not interested in looking at the actual exhibits and things that really should be in the museum, things that are old and have relevancy versus something that's brand new and it's just not really going to be that relevant. It's kind of one of these ridiculous like Guinness World Records type attempts. It would be just as interesting, frankly, if they just had a 100 or 200 inch display projector and a main cabinet playing Donkey Kong and multiple other games on the wall, and you just had the world's largest video game like video game projection. And even at that, that's probably not going to be the world's largest. Yeah, I just don't get it. just seems like that's a waste of square footage where real things that should be highlighted should be there for that effort. I guess I'll play one more time. For the amount of square footage that's taking up, you could easily have had 2 or 3 arcade cabinets that were regular size, or many other things on display that are more historically relevant. There was this announcement. Microsoft announces another 10-year partnership, this time with EE, in the latest series of commitments made as part of its attempt for the Activision Blizzard acquisition. I think pretty much since Microsoft made a 10-year commitment to one person, they pretty much have just made a 10-year plan to say Call of Duty for the next 10 years will be on everything, and then that throughout that 10 years they're likely to make another plan to eventually make Call of Duty exclusive or replace it with something else. EE is not anything I recognize, though. It's a UK mobile network operator and internet service provider, so it really doesn't make any big deal to me that you have an internet service provider that would give you what? Game Pass? Players can already add Xbox Game Pass to their mobile tariffs for reduced costs via EE Smart Benefits. So there's some kind of weird mobile tariff thing going on there in the UK. This offers access to Xbox Game Pass and Xbox Cloud and PC already, so it's not entirely clear what this new deal will entail, as EE doesn't offer its own game streaming platform. Yeah. So even Video Games Chronicle here is uncertain as to what this commitment actually means. Moving on, the Portal writer says he's joking about making Portal 3 and doesn't want to cause strife at Valve. Eric Wolpaw says he'd like to make it, but that Valve is smaller than people realize. I feel like he has joked about this before, and I don't know if this is the same writer who also wrote Half-Life 3 and then released it changing the names because he basically realized they were never going to make Half-Life 3. This is an interesting story that seems to be getting more interesting as I scroll down. I don't think Valve particularly cares who writes Portal 3 or Half-Life 3, and I think they'd be more than capable of hiring somebody else to write the stories if they were actually going to make those kinds of games. But yeah, this seems to take a weird twist. There's a quote here: "The thing is, Valve is not a giant company. I think people sometimes think it because of the outsized influence of Steam, but it's really not that many people. It takes manpower to keep Dota going. It takes manpower to keep CSGO going, and the freeform nature of Valve means that there is a lot of experiments that simply fail. So things are happening. Even if you were inside Valve, you would think the stuff was always going on because it is. As much as I enjoy working on the things I worked on at Valve and my time at Valve, it's important to me if I've chosen between Valve games and Steam, which I feel is the most democratizing technology that ever came out, um, I'm not gonna play anymore. I'll just keep that one daily quest. Like, I don't link summon very often, so it's no surprise really that I'm struggling to get this daily quest done. And I don't fusion summon or pendulum summon at all. As far as the Game Pass goes, though, we are 14 levels up already. Or 14 rewards, 8 levels up. Yeah, I definitely need to just start focusing on the news because I am not getting through it very fast at all. If anything, I just have an actual interest in the news more today. As much as I enjoy the things I worked on at Valve and my time at Valve, it's important. And it's important to me if I'd chosen between Valve and Steam games, which I feel is the most democratizing technology to ever come out to allow people to create games and get them in front of people. I guess I would choose Steam. Take everything I say with a grain of salt, because much like anyone entrenched in some systems, I don't have the 100,000 foot view. My view is very subjective, and I think that the problem people always think it is, and I've done it myself, more joking than anything else, is a money problem. But it's not a money problem, it's a manpower problem. I would argue the problem with Valve, if Valve has a problem, is a leadership problem and a motivation problem. They're just not motivated to make Half-Life 3 or Portal 3, and there's no leadership there forcing them to do that. If anything, it's a money problem in the sense that they have too much money, and so they can rest on their laurels, and there's a lack of competition, really. So they can rest on their laurels. You have to pick what you're going to work on, and time is limited. Now, what gets interesting here is you have this person tweeting. I spoke to Eric Walpole, the writer of Portal, about his lawyer father's arrest, founding the website Old Man Murray with this other person, and the success of Steam and its impact on Valve's creative work and the looming possibility of Portal 3. So apparently there's some backstory here on this person that doesn't really have anything to do with video games, where his father was a lawyer and was arrested, which honestly, there are enough lawyers out there that are kind of crazy and corrupt that do get arrested in the United States, and frankly, maybe more of them should be arrested for some of the stuff they do. And so he's got this book, My Perfect Console, which I wonder if he somehow was involved in something criminal too. So is there anything more to grab from this without having to read all this? This is one of those articles too that I don't think has too much to do with anything. Yeah, they just wanted a title, a headline with Portal 3 in the name, basically. Almost certainly I would say Eric Walpole isn't going to be the writer of Portal 3 if a Portal 3 ever gets made. We are closer today than ever to a Portal 3 being made, but we may very well be nowhere close to a Portal 3 being made. And I only say that because Half-Life Alyx hinted at potentially rebooting or continuing Half-Life to the point where we may actually see a Half-Life 3 in the next 30 years. And if a Half-Life 3 comes out, then Portal 3 I think is also on the table there. And certainly if there was a new gameplay concept or idea that people in Valve really loved, that they could put into a game called Portal 3. They would release Portal 3 in an instant, but if it's just going to be an iterative continuation of Portal 1 and Portal 2, they're less likely to ever bother making something like that. There is also a mod out there that I just heard about. I think it's relatively new, that will turn Half-Life Alyx into a game that's playable without VR. And I would like to see Valve embrace that idea of that mod and release Half-Life Alyx in a non-VR version. Half-Life Alyx has been out long enough where it wouldn't hurt the sales, really, of VR headsets for them to release a 2D version. And honestly, I could see Valve abandoning their experiments in VR and saying, hey, we tried VR, it's just too expensive, the technology is not there, the part shortages made that absolutely clear. So it would make a lot of sense for them to abandon VR, focus that team on Steam Deck stuff. I could even see a Steam Deck 2 that has a very simplistic VR headset that is much smaller and is more like the in-real augmented reality glasses, which just are like regular glasses with screens on them. I could see a Switch 2 compatible with an accessory like that instead of a big headset that you would put over your head and would have a ton of processing power and lenses and just be too heavy and need special controllers and things like that. And if they abandoned VR for the most part, which it is mostly abandoned anyways, they could then focus on the Steam Deck, which has been much better seller and much bigger success. And then they could make Alyx 2D, which then could just promote towards a Half-Life 3, which would then potentially promote to a Portal 3, none of which has to be written by Eric Wolpaw. They almost certainly would hire new writers, I think, for any new game they make at this point, because I don't think they have a lot of love or interest in doing more work with Eric Wolpaw, and I don't think, if I was to guess, maybe they do. This is just a wild guess, but I'm almost certain they have no interest in dealing with the Half-Life 3 writer, who I think is a different person. Moving on, PC Game Pass is fully launched in 40 new countries. Players who took part in recent testing will receive 2 free months of membership, so I guess there was perhaps a benefit retroactively if you had been part of that testing. That being said, these listings of places are kind of second world countries, third world countries, if I was to just generally say. No big places here that are going to have a lot of people or a big entrance. There's no Russia, no China. Ukraine is an interesting one in the sense that I doubt there's very few people in Ukraine who have time or connectivity that they'd be doing Game Pass at this point. And it probably was very easy to flip switches to allow 40 new countries. It's more about just getting the legalese and the contracts right, and making it so that people in places like Ukraine don't have to use VPNs to get Game Pass. EA Sports announces a plan to invest $10 million into grassroots football projects alongside the unveiling of Rocky and Rydo Arena at Turnham Academy in London. So this looks like a very small football pitch based on the scale. I have to assume that this is probably for little kids at Turnham Academy. And I also am assuming that these are real world fields. Yeah. Yep, this is seemingly little kids. Hmm. Hmm. I have no idea who Rocky and Rydo are, but yeah, I'll leave it at that. So basically, EA Sports spent $10 million, or plans to invest $10 million as a way of potentially tax write offs and free advertising. So, not really a lot of story there that you can get from it. Last of Us showrunners and stars address Joel's fate in season 2. Let's see. The executive producer Craig Mazin says he doesn't quote feel constrained by the source material. I felt like season 2 was still going to involve parts of part 1, the first video game. So I imagine Joel would still show up in season 2, and honestly, even in part 2, the second video game of Last of Us, you could have him show up in flashbacks or as a force ghost type character, somebody who is not really there but who is always talking to Ellie, or whatever her name is. So yeah, you can keep him around. Just on the practicality of it, I feel like the main male protagonist, who's an adult, probably needs to be around to help support things. Otherwise, somewhere either between season 2 or season 3, they are going to dump almost all the acting requirements on Ellie, the actual child actor, and the show potentially is going to become really, really bad because of that. And even if they killed Joel as a character off, I feel like you still would need to bring in some kind of adult companion for the child actor to just kind of help the show be a better show. And I'll leave it at that. Moving on, a PlayStation State of Play returns this week with a Final Fantasy 16 showcase. I believe that's literally all they're going to show. No. They are reiterating here that the producer would like to see a PC version of the game eventually, but I think also the director of Final Fantasy 16 straight up said, if you want to see a Final Fantasy 16 on PC, you better buy it day one on PlayStation anyways, otherwise it's just going to fail miserably. Some veiled threat like that. Overall, I'm not hearing a lot of interesting stuff around Final Fantasy 16. It doesn't feel like too many people are hyped around it, and it doesn't feel like it's going to be particularly that interesting. That being said, the last big Final Fantasy game, 15, actually looked a lot more interesting before it was released and had a lot of hype around it and got a lot of promotion. And then when you actually play the game, there's basically no story in the game at all. And I don't know if people really received Final Fantasy 15 particularly well. Arguably, they should just take a break and stop making new Final Fantasies until they can finish remastering and remaking Final Fantasy 7 and consider remastering and remaking some of the other Final Fantasies like 13 or maybe even 12. Moving on, Warzone 2 Season 3 adds a one-shot sniper, pacing, and movement changes. I guess you can check out this Video Games Chronicle article if you're more interested in the details on that. Destroy All Humans 2 Reprobed is getting a $30 last-gen port with multiplayer removed. The remake came to the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X and S last year. So, this is an interesting twist, certainly, to have a remake of a game that people were kind of interested in the fact that it got a remake in the first place, but I don't know if such a weird niche game was ever going to sell that well. And now they are making a port to last gen PS4 and Xbox One, but they're getting rid of multiplayer and reducing the price. But even at that, $30 might be a little too much. It's an interesting thought, certainly, but I would definitely hope that's not the beginning of a trend where we see inferior products that are missing features for last gen consoles. It's kinder, frankly, to just straight up not make last gen ports in the first place if you can't port everything. Apparently, the classic Japanese developer Sunsoft is holding a second presentation next week. The first event took place last year and revealed some new games. So, like, first event, I guess, ever in the history of Sunsoft is what they're implying. Okay, well, we'll just have to wait and see what they have to announce. And then I would probably have to decide whether or do more research to figure out if the Sunsoft that exists now is in any way the Sunsoft that existed before, or if it isn't just a new group of people that happen to have the licensing rights to Sunsoft games and the name Sunsoft, very much in the same way that Atari is not the Atari it used to be. Let's see. THQ Nordic community manager denies claims that the AEW Fight Forever is basically ready. If you want an unfinished game, sure, we could release it now. Which I don't know why you'd even respond and give more coverage to somebody asking that. It seems somebody put out an article and were asked on Twitter, but I don't know if it really makes a lot of sense for you to even respond to something like this when you could have just not responded to it, and then you wouldn't have had Video Games Chronicles writing an article on a bad article or bad claim. Let's see. The response is not super offensive, though. I mean, it's like, if you want an unfinished game, sure, we could release it now. Smiley face. The game is doing really well and getting there, but it's not 100% yet. So, yeah, just another rumor on Twitter, I fear. And an exhausted face. Which, in fairness, this is a better response on Twitter to somebody asking a question that says, than responding the way the lawyers would have you respond, which is, we have nothing to announce at this time, nothing new to announce at this time, which would be the default response that you would send out to an actual journalist, actually asking people via email or even by letter or phone. Moving on, a new Disney Dreamlight Valley survey hints at a possible future Star Path themes. Nightmare Before Christmas and Disney Channel Originals are among the 11 options. I could see Nightmare Before Christmas being very popular. Some of the Disney Channel Originals would be weird, but it'd be kind of cool at some level. I'd almost have to see a list of the names to see what they're really talking about there. Disney villains would be newer things for younger kids, and Dreamlight Valley really is for Disney adults. They're saying items such as Kim Possible and Lizzie McGuire is what they're calling Disney Channel Originals, where I was thinking Disney Channel Originals that would have been like within the first couple decade or two of Disney Channel, which like the Mickey Mouse Club and things like that, which that's really, really old stuff that I'm sure not that many people remember, but the people that would remember it might be somewhat interested in that. Lizzie McGuire is much more recent. Kim Possible, much more recent. Occupational add-ons, vacation add-ons, Disney Cruise add-ons. All those are less interesting. Winter holiday thoughts kind of do make sense. Pixar characters make a lot of sense. Disney princesses would make a lot of sense. Jean jackets, patches, and crew neck sweatshirts. That's more retro old stuff. Sporty stuff. Clearly, though, like Nightmare Before Christmas, Disney princesses, and even the Disney villains and Disney originals are way more interesting than just gardener or chef occupational items. Of course, part of the problem here with the survey too is that this game as a service that is just trying to be a Stardew Valley that's going to constantly add more and more items is just going to constantly add more and more items that they're going to try and get you to pay for with real world money. And I don't see where it ends, and I don't know if making a bunch of real world like gardener items or chef items would help them use those kinds of items in a different Disney game, or if they aren't just exclusively making 3D models of items only for this game, which probably will never be the biggest of games, or probably won't last forever. It is a game that could potentially go on forever, but they're seemingly already struggling with ideas. Let's see. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says the remake of the cult 90s platformer Duel is coming to PlayStation. Duel Redimensioned was released for PC in 2021. Let's see. If I click Steam, that then takes me there to the listings of every article with Steam in it. So, yeah. I should make a YouTube short around the PC game if the PlayStation 1 is coming out. PlayStation version is coming out on May 16th. Because then that would increase the relevancy. But otherwise, there's nothing else I can do around that. Let's see. The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom final pre-release trailer arrives on Thursday. A final pre-release trailer means basically nothing as a phrase. It probably would be better to say the final Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom pre-release trailer, or just say another trailer and give it a name. Would be a better way to label it. This is the third trailer that they've put out so far, and the first two have not caught my interest, so I assume the third one wouldn't catch my interest. In all in all fairness, I didn't even get halfway through the original Breath of the Wild Zelda game, and I have Metroid Dread still sitting on my table unopened, and I bought that months ago, so I'm not a very good Nintendo Switch player at this rate. I haven't played the Switch in months. Moving on, PlayStation may have finally stopped sending thank you for your purchase emails for PlayStation Plus games. The automated emails often confuse players who think they've accidentally bought something. Every time they claimed a monthly free PlayStation Plus game. So you're still claiming it. And what's funny, in the Epic Games Store, it was the exact opposite problem a year or two ago, where you would claim a game on the Epic Games Store for free and you wouldn't get any kind of email confirmation at all. And they very quickly on the Epic Games Store, and this is perhaps the only thing that they ever quickly fixed or improved upon as far as the Epic Games Store. Changed the email to just highlight that yes, you got it, but it cost $0, so you weren't paying any real world money. And I haven't heard anybody complain about that. So the fact that this is going on, has been going on for years, really just highlights how PlayStation doesn't care to fix a lot of problems. Like, PlayStation ironically sells itself as being the higher quality product with better games, but when it gets anywhere close to their actual infrastructure of PlayStation Plus or streaming or anything like that, it's by far less polished and inferior, and they just haven't put any effort into it. They're pouring all of their money and energy to just developing the AAA exclusives instead, which may actually make more money, but it makes a worse experience. Recently I looked at whether the PlayStation 5 even had like smart home integration features, and it basically has none. It barely integrates with just the HDMI CEC controls, where you could use one remote to control a PlayStation 5 and a TV at the same time. Moving on, Redfall won't have a 60 frames per second performance mode on Xbox Series X and S at launch. It'll be added via game date, a later date, which almost certainly implies that there's some performance issues with Redfall, which is the last thing Redfall needs, because it's already got a lack of interest generally from most players, when really it should be something that's way more interesting. Very possibly Redfall may be the last game Arcane gets to make before Arcane gets broken up, which, yeah, that would kind of suck. But if Deathloop and Redfall both fail pretty badly amongst not having a passionate enough player bases, there's really no reason to give them a third attempt at making a game. There was also, I'll mention this and not really say too much about it, a first look video of gameplay from Redfall from IGN, I believe, where they got exclusive access to show off some gameplay. And the person playing did what looked like a pretty poor job of playing the game. It's not as bad as like the Cuphead video where the guy can't even get past the tutorial, but it definitely did not look like the person had ever had adequate enough experience as far as playing a first-person shooter or a Left 4 Dead type game, and so he was basically just running away from the enemy instead of attacking and killing the enemy, which would visually have been more interesting. He's not really highlighting gameplay elements or abilities. He's just kind of randomly running around and making footage. It feels very much like they may have had an intern play the game to make the video footage instead. And I certainly don't think I can blame Redfall's performance issues or development around somebody just playing the game badly. If anything, it might just be yet another example of video game journalists not being video gamers, in the sense that they are terrible at playing video games, or they're used to playing video games with special cheats given to them so that they never die, and when you ever see them actually play, they are pathetically bad. I'm not to say that I'm personally that good at video games, but I think I'm good enough. I think I'm close to the average of a gamer. I don't think my experience in Redfall would have been as bad as this looked. Of course, it is also very possible that if I might play Redfall and find that it is a particularly difficult game where you do have to run away more. But yeah, people are ridiculing IGN's footage, and that's basically the only newsworthy part of that. April's PlayStation Plus games catalog and classic titles have been confirmed. They include Kena Bridge of Spirits, Doom Eternal, Riders Republic, and more. So, it's a long list here on Video Games Chronicle of games, and then some premium games too, as far as premium classics. And then our last Video Games Chronicle article for today says Xbox April's update adds a new search experience and power settings. Xbox in particular is trying to go more green, or perhaps better described as greenwashing, with its power settings, but having more options is really not a bad thing. Arguably, the Xbox Series X and S have, by default, had not enough options as far as power, and do stay on way too much. Moving on to the Gematsu articles. Inscription is now available for the Xbox Series and Xbox One. We will leave it at that. Fuga Melodies of Steel 2 has gone gold, so it's close to being released. Rogue Company for Switch is going to end service on June 20th. All in-game purchases end today. That's an abrupt announcement. That being said, I don't know if too many people were playing the game Rogue Company. I don't even recognize it as a thing. Dreams is going to end live support on September 1st as Media Molecule shifts focus to an exciting new project. The roguelike action third-person shooter Die After Sunset launches in 2023 for the PS5, Xbox Series, Switch, and PC. It's currently early access on PC, but doesn't seem to have an actual release date. And you can also see that it is mixed reviewed. It looks like there might have been a game here. I like the artistic style on it, but yeah, doesn't seem like it's been well received. I guess I'll put this on the fall list and check up on it later. A 2D adventure pixel art dungeon editor called Super Dungeon Maker launches May 3rd for the Switch and PC, which I assume this is more of a game where in the game you can make your own dungeons, but it's not really a software where you would end up being able to sell these dungeons inside of Steam via Steam Direct. I'm not really sure the balancing idea though. If you're creating a dungeon that you're going to play and only you are going to play, wouldn't your instinct just be to make it fairly easy unless you get better rewards some other way? And most of this looks very much like the designs of Zelda custom levels in Link's Awakening, which there was that whole element in Link's Awakening where you would find tiles and be able to make your own dungeons, and then they had some challenges around that. This definitely feels like this is a Zelda game without Zelda, but if it is 100% around the idea of making your own dungeons, it may not be that fun to actually play after the fact. But yeah, apparently this is coming out of early access on May 3rd on Switch, on PC. Let's see, Worms WMD Mobilize is now available for iOS and Android. This is, I assume, a $5.99 port of Worms WMD, which, yeah, looks just like a Worms game. And this could be, frankly, one of the newest Worms games, or it could have been one of the earliest Worms games, and I visually wouldn't be able to tell much of a difference. The Worms games probably do make a lot of sense to be on mobile, but then there's the question about multiplayer there, if there is any multiplayer at all. It doesn't seem like there is any way to potentially take turns and send your actions to another player. Yeah, it says it's turn-based action strategy game, but I think it very much is probably only single player. That being said, still, this is a real game coming to mobile phones, and there's so few of those. You have to kind of applaud any progress you see in that way at all. Then Destroy All 2, All Humans 2, Reprobed Single Player is the subtitle, coming to the PS4 and Xbox One on June 27th. And then the Nintendo Live Seattle being announced. The game called Warhammer 40k, 40k is what it's always referred to as in my mind. Bolt Gun launches May 23rd, a retro style first person shooter, which is not really what I would expect from the Warhammer universe. Yeah, it feels very much like a Doom Quake clone, and outside of what I would expect to see in the Warhammer universe. And inherently you run into this problem where, as much as I would like to get into the Warhammer 40k universe, there's just like no way to do it in video games, because almost every Warhammer 40k game sucks, and if you were to get into the actual tabletop Warhammer 40k, that's just going to cost so much money that you probably couldn't afford to play video games and play for Warhammer, or you wouldn't have enough time to play Warhammer and play video games. They're almost mutually exclusive in every way. A Redfall character trailer for Jacob Bauer is here. This would be the second character trailer video. A side-scrolling survival simulation game called Far World Pioneers launches May 30th for the PS5, Xbox Series, PS4, Xbox One, and PC. Which looks like you're this tiny little character. Pixely platforming and running and gunning. I'm not seeing anything here that really impresses me that much. Let's see. Let's check out the Steam link and see if any of these screenshots grab my attention more. Nope, this really is a game that I would just dismiss. It's just too pixely, too zoomed out for my own interest. So I'm not going to bother to put that on the fall list. Hot Wheels Unleashed sales have topped 2 million. I feel like that is a very low number for as long as this game has been out. Part of the problems I think with Hot Wheels Unleashed may be that Hot Wheels is just not that popular of a brand name, and that there was just a lot of kind of obvious microtransactions in a kid's game that really shouldn't have had microtransactions. They say over 8 million players registered across all platforms, which is to say that it's free to play, and 6 million of 2 million people have not spent a single dollar on it. 1.3 million user-generated content. 939 current playtime in years, which that really probably doesn't mean much either. Let's see. This is on Steam, so let's see what the reviews are. It is very positive, but yeah, you get the Game of the Year edition, and then potentially $15 for Looney Tunes or Monster Trucks or Batman, or Pass Volume 1, which maybe includes some of that, or Pass Volume 2. All of this together, a lot of 99 cents, a lot of free stuff, but all together, excluding including redundancies, is $267 in DLC. Now, in all fairness, redundancies might be very redundant in that the Game of the Year version may include past Volume 1, Volume 2, and Volume 3. Or it may not, and it may only include past Volume 1, or it may not include even past Volume 1, so maybe you would have to get the Game of the Year upgrade pack, and this, and this, and this, and even at that, you're at a very high price. And the game is not free, which that's interesting too, that you have a $50 game or a $90 Game of the Year game. That puts it at a very, very high price. Meanwhile, I doubt this is going to be a game that a lot of people are going to play, comparing it to something like a Mario Kart on PC. To total peak today is 106 players on Steam. Its all-time peak is only 2,579. So a lot of people played this, but not really a lot of people online. This did come out on September 30th of 2021, which that does certainly color the idea that the sales have topped 2 million in 2 years. That's not a very high number. Moving on, State of Play is set for April 13th, featuring more than 20 minutes of Final Fantasy XVI gameplay, and as far as I understand, nothing else. Genshin Impact version 3.6 update is now available, which, check out this list, I guess, if you want to see all the new things or changes they've done to Genshin Impact. Genshin Impact still fairly popular as a mobile game, enough that it's relevant enough to talk about, compared to most mobile games which aren't relevant enough to talk about. Ghostwire Tokyo is now available for the Xbox Series alongside the Spider's Thread update. So, I would like for Ghostwire Tokyo to become a better game by the time I consider actually playing it. But at best, I think it's going to be slightly better than average as a game, and still not relevant enough that for me to spend time on, considering how so few other people have played the game. Sunsoft is back to live stream set for April 20th. The Famitsu review scores for issue 1793 are out, giving Atomic Heart a 30 out of 40, which they were kind of delayed as far as giving out the Atomic Heart reviews. Noticeably, these are the Atomic Heart reviews for consoles, not the PC version, which maybe got a little bit better of a review. But still, the score is somewhat low, and you have to just assume that the problems with Atomic Heart are too difficult to really fix that much without some fan mod. So Atomic Heart, while an interesting looking game, would, I think, fairly quickly move into a AA or single A niche style game that I might cover just because it's so weird looking, instead of trying to cover it like it's potentially the next BioShock, which I think that's the wrong way to really approach Atomic Heart, is to think that it ever had a chance of being the next BioShock game. I question if the Ken Levine next game that he makes is even going to be the next BioShock. I question if BioShock Infinite was even the next BioShock. Buccaneer for the PS4 and Switch got 27 out of 40, which is even less. Cannon Dancer Osman got 28 out of 40. Coffee Talk 2, Hibiscus and Butterfly got 31 out of 40. And then MLB The Show got 30 out of 40. So nothing really amazingly well reviewed. Generally, we're looking for 32s out of 40 at minimum from Famitsu. Coffee Talk Episode 2, I guess, getting the best reference. And then the screenshot, I guess, is probably from Buccaneer or Cannon Dancer. I have no idea. Aliens Fireteam Elite Cloud version is coming to the Switch on April 26th, which... Is there another versions? Oh, when did this come out? In 2021? It is on my wish list. Is this really a game that you could kind of play single player, or is this a game that is much better with online co-op? I need to do some more research on this. We're continuing to see trends of cloud versions for Switch games, Switch versions in the cloud. I don't know if this Fireteam Elite really would catch my attention, because it feels like it's a game where the alien xenomorphs are going to be fairly easy to kill, and that you're going to be seeing too many of them too often and fighting them too often. In a lot of ways it feels just like it's a looter shooter, kind of like Borderlands, but with the limitation of only fighting xenomorphs, and that there just won't be that much visual variety between different types of xenomorphs, if there are even different types of xenomorphs. Whereas when you think about Borderlands, they have a very large variety of enemies to shoot at that keeps that game more interesting as a looter shooter. Moving on, Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak Free Title Update 5 digital event is set for April 19th. So I assume this is an announcement for a free update as far as Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. What consoles is this on? Basically everything. A game called Labyrinth of Zangetsu launches April 20th in the West, which looks like a dungeon crawling game with maybe a somewhat unique art style to it. Let's see. A few little Chinese, Japanese looking monsters and heroes. Yeah, it doesn't look particularly too different otherwise. It still looks like a dungeon crawler. A game called Fantavision 2020 or 202X is coming to PC on April 27th. It looks like it's a VR game that is losing its VR. Masterpiece arcade puzzle game released in the 2000s. I have no idea how this would play. This, to me, just looks like a bunch of fireworks and visual distractions. Maybe this is supposed to be like a missile defender type game and you're blowing up fireworks so that they don't hit the bottom of the screen. Yeah. I'm going to put this on the follow list just to try and figure out what it is, but by first glance I would definitely just dismiss it as nothing. It's a game that really could have used a trailer. Trine 5, A Clockwork Conspiracy has been announced for the PS5, Xbox Series, PS4, Xbox One, Switch, and PC. So this would, I guess, be an attempt to push the Trine series forward and help people forget about Trine 3 in particular that everybody hated. Now the visuals here look very different from what I would have expected from a Trine game, since Trines have been like this 2.5D platforming. You switch between 3 different characters with 3 different very different abilities. I've only covered and played Trine 1, I think. I don't think I got to Trine 2 yet. And this feels very similar to Trine 1. So it's not particularly a bad thing, it just highlights that there's not been that much of a difference. Not that much of a change. And apparently they don't have a Steam link yet, because clicking on PC took me to a different page. This is coming out in the summer. Moving on, a Legend of Heroes Trails into Reverie features trailers available. The Legend of Heroes series, though, seems to have some different visuals to it, in that here you have a character in more of a magical anime girl outfit, and then you see them in beachwear, summerwear, for what looks like it's mostly a mech game and a dungeon crawler type game. But then there's also some mini games here that they're also highlighting. So it's like a virtual world, it may be, or a fantasy world. And then you pick teams, and then you grind, and that's the vast majority, I imagine, of what you do is you are grinding in RPG elements like that. And then there's going to be some little mini games that you spend a little time with. And this mech fighting might be a mini game itself. And then there's your cheesecake, put them in bikinis and have them, I guess, race on the back of a giant banana. Some beach mini games. Be blindfolded and smash the watermelon open. These are very much Japanese things, at least the watermelon is, not something that I think is done anywhere else. There's, if anything, an overemphasis on those mini games versus what the actual game is going to be. But I imagine the actual game is just going to be a very standard RPG experience. A game called Noob the Factionless launches June 19th, seemingly for everything. Let's go to the Steam page and see if we get a better visual as to what it is. I really wish Yu-Gi-Oh! Would switch up the audio a little bit. At this point, it's for over a year now. I've been listening to the same background music play over and over again. But I don't really know what else I could do as far as background music. I could find a couple songs, certainly, and try and play them, but it would just be more work for me. And at any point, any one of those songs could then be content ID'd, claimed, and cause big problems in the long run for my channel. Whereas if I stick with this Yu-Gi-Oh! Background music, then the only song I have to worry about is that one song. Same is true with the YouTube Shorts and the exact same song being used over and over again. Theoretically, I'd like that to change up, but in reality, it's not worth it, and it's definitely not worth it to have absolute silence in the background. That's more annoying. We already talked about Duel Redimensioned coming to the PS5 and PS4 on May 16th. Currently already available on PC. This one does have a link to this. Should I put this on the follow list? No. Yeah, I think there's a relevancy here that I may have overlooked as far as that. Also means I can close this tab and move forward. A game called Killer Frequency launches June 1st for basically everything including Quest 2. A dark comedy slasher horror game, apparently, is what it is. Hmm. Hmm. I'm not sure what you really do in this. It seems almost like you're running the radio station as people are being killed by a slasher throughout the city. Hmm. That there might be some investigative mystery you do from the radio station, but you don't potentially ever get too far away from the radio station. Hmm. Unique comedy, horror, radio host experience, real time decisions, and puzzle solving, fully voice acted and retro soundtrack, genuine 1980s aesthetic. It's not a terrible thought for a story. It might be a kind of bad thought for a video game, though. If anything, it feels like there's more people that worked at radio stations that went on to work in video games than there are average people, average gamer that worked at radio stations. Um, so it's potentially a hard to relate to narrative because very few people actually have worked at radio stations, and particularly nowadays, almost nobody would work as a radio DJ of any sort or radio presenter. Power Wash Simulator version 1.2 update launches April 18th. A physical edition also launches June 13th. So that gives me an excuse to make a YouTube short around Power Wash Simulator. So we'll open up that. We can see Power Wash Simulator is overwhelmingly positive as a concept. Honestly, though, I think House Flipper is probably a more interesting game, particularly with House Flipper 2 coming out relatively soon from now, in that you are cleaning and doing a lot of the stuff you do like in Power Wash Simulator and House Flipper, but then you're doing a lot more, whereas Power Wash Simulator is exclusively power washing things, which if that's the only thing you want to do, I guess then this is the game for you. But if you wanted to exclusively clean things in multiple ways, then maybe you would even go with Viscera Cleanup Crew, or House Flipper. House Flipper being the most realistic experience that you would have. Very few people, I assume, have the jobs where they would power wash interesting objects instead of just power washing walls. Very often, exterior walls and sidewalks. We're not going to get a lot of times in which you can power wash statues and playgrounds. Moving on, Endless Dungeon has been delayed to October 19th. It's no longer due out on May 18th. This is a game I do not recognize from Sega. And if anything, Sega should not be announcing games if they had any potential being delayed. Yeah, I totally just do not recognize this at all. For this to be a Sega published game, there should have been a lot more fanfare around it. Alright, we have about 4 more Gematsu articles. A game called Ravenlock launches May 4th. It's a fairy tale action RPG available via Xbox Game Pass and maybe on Steam. Nope, it's an Epic Games Store exclusive. It's kind of hard to tell, but there might be something here, but it might not. It seems like maybe the art style's a little bit different or the fashion maybe is a little bit different. What feels interesting here is that here you have a rabbit in a hat, and she's going through a mirror. This feels very Alice in Wonderland like. And again, to kind of talk about American McGee's Alice and Alice Asylum, you could have definitely made a game like Alice Asylum and just had a new character that this would be your Alice character, but they don't look anything like the Disney Alice or Alice Madness Returns Alice. But you could still certainly be in the open source Alice in Wonderland story world, and those elements can be repeated as far as rabbits and hats. There's some pixely, almost Roblox looking voxel things on this table, but the rest of the game feels maybe a little voxely, but not that voxely. And maybe that's the way voxel games should go, is that some things should be a little voxely, but that's it. Whereas this big caterpillar type character or monster doesn't look voxely at all. I probably would like voxel games better if they didn't have as many pixely appearances to it. If it was just a slight visual aesthetic. And here you see the queen. This is totally Alice in Wonderland. And I like the idea of here you have like a modern girl in modern clothes from Alice in Wonderland and a more empowered girl with a sword and shield, which is not usually how Alice is depicted, even in that American McGee's series where she does have a giant butcher knife. Unfortunately, it's not coming to Steam anytime soon, so I find that annoying. The actual gameplay here feels kind of more like a large arena fighting of characters, hack and slash experience. I don't think they're going for really a Dark Souls vibe that much. There's a dog. She's dancing. Those are different ideas, certainly, compared to what we've seen as far as Alice in Wonderland before. Puzzles. It's got potions you can throw, like bombs. This definitely catches my attention. It may not be that much, though. Looking at this, it may just be more of a mostly boss rush type game where you go from arena to fight. That is something about Lego DC Supervillains too, is that the Lego levels are very narrow in that there's not that much square footage from the left to the right. Sometimes they go towards the foreground or the background or up and down a little bit, but not that much. So it makes all of the levels that I've seen so far in Lego DC Supervillains feel more like a round arena, and very often you are fighting enemies in those arena levels, and so it just doesn't quite feel like your standard Lego designed level where you start at the far left and work your way to the far right after 20 minutes of gameplay. The PlayStation Plus games catalog and classics lineups from Gamatsu are listed here. We've basically already covered this, but if you want to see it from Gamatsu, you can check out that article. A game called Psychic 5 Eternal launches July 27th in Japan. What kind of game is it? So, it's an action side-scrolling game. Well, I guess there's probably 4 more of these games that were released. This is a remake of a 1987 arcade classic. and so maybe it never came to the West, and that's why I don't recognize it. Remake does make it look relatively good. Doesn't feel like an old game. But yeah, I'm not sure this one's going to come to the West. And then our last Gematsu article for today says Amnesia the Bunker has been delayed to May 23rd, which, okay. When I get a delay of a game, I probably should not reward that game by making another YouTube short around it. That's probably the case to go with. That being said, I'm going to make a special exception here because I don't think I've made a YouTube short around this before. So, I will put this on the follow list. The Amnesia series in particular does have a decent amount of relevancy, even though this bunker game is really a completely different game. But yeah, I think it's relevant enough to make a YouTube short on it, even if it is being delayed. Alright, and so now we're going to go through games that came out on Steam. This one's on the follow list. I may very well have made a YouTube short around it already, but I'm going to have to just assume I didn't and do it again. This is already 93% positive with 46 reviews for a visual novel. That's pretty crazy. What's bigger crazy though is while you have the Disney logo here on the thumbnail, you're not having Disney in the title up here, nor are you having Disney act as a publisher. So this is straight up Bithell or BitHell Games. Yeah, it's BitHell, isn't it? Self-publishing this game and licensing the Tron franchise. Which, yeah, maybe that's the better way for things to go, is to have Disney barely be involved at all, just have game companies come to them and license their properties and make games. And for some games, small visual novels might be the way to do things. I don't know how many Tron Identity games though I would really want to play. If it became 4 or 5 visual novels based on Tron, that would be a little exhausting, even if they're relatively short. And then if they started to make visual novels based on more kid-friendly properties, then that would be a little weird too. If it was Disney's Cars, for instance, or Winnie the Pooh visual novel, that would be weird. Moving on. Wait, oops. I shouldn't have closed that, should I? That's exactly not what I wanted to do. I wonder how many times I've done that so far. I've accidentally let's see. History, I still haven't really figured out this whole system. As far as undoing closed tabs, there's probably a shortcut I should learn. Yeah, I do wonder how many times I've accidentally closed the tab when I shouldn't have. Sushi Survival looks like it's a Vampire Survivors game that's probably zoomed in a little too much and too much of a gimmick for me to say yes to. But maybe I am developing too much of a bias too against these Vampire Survivor clones. I mean, it is 80% positive, so let's give it a chance. Inherently, the danger here is that Vampire Survivor clones may be the next big thing, and this may just be the evolution of video games, and I don't want to be a stick in the mud and refuse to evolve with the gaming community just because I'm being a contrarian or acting like an old fool. Here we have a adult game, or is it an adult game? It's called Unscripted, and it says it has sexual content in the tags. The sex scenes are fully optional and non-explicit. The alcohol, drug use, it's not in the adult section. It's English only without voice acting. And this is, I think, early access episodic. Now, let me just look at the screenshots to see if this is YouTube family friendly. There's one screenshot with a girl on top of a guy, but she's actually fully clothed. So I think we're probably pretty okay here. So it's kind of a better polished 3D CGI characters compared to the average low effort 3D CGI adult game. But you can also see the reviews here are not particularly great. And almost certainly this is just a visual novel that's trying to hide the fact that it's a visual novel. Yeah. I don't really see too much here that would make me interested in it. They're calling it a true-to-life dating sim, but I suspect it's probably more of a visual novel. If anything, this is probably a game that is failing because it is not in the adult section, and had you tried to sell this exact same game a little bit more honestly by calling it episode 1 and B as an adult game just full of nudity and every screenshot being adult content, it probably would sell to a better audience or a less demanding audience that way. That being said, $12.99 is probably way too expensive whether it was full of adult content or not, so we have to say no to that. Floating Islands of Nucifer doesn't look quite polished enough. Towers Together just looks like a tower defense game. Adventure Awaits looks like the exact same type of game. I guess it isn't. Mocha Jet. Portable VR. Doesn't look like much of anything. Soko Lab. Doesn't catch my attention. Paint by Pixel. If these were really cheap, way cheaper than $5.59, the idea of a paint by number, paint by pixel concept isn't terrible. But honestly, I feel like these are things that really you should print out and do in the real world instead of doing digitally. Perhaps if you were doing this on a Steam Deck or a Nintendo Switch, then a paint by number would be a clean way to do that kind of activity. But also, I just don't think kids these days, and this is basically a kids' activity, are that simplistic. They'd much rather be playing Mario Odyssey than doing a paint by number thing. Here we have a true adult game called Hybrid Slave, HYBRISLAV. It is, from the looks of it, a RPG Maker game with adult content, which seems to be about half of all RPG Maker games that get made, whether or not the adult content gets removed when they put it on Steam Direct or not. The game is $9.89, says it supports English, Japanese, and Chinese. And like all of these RPG Maker games, there's really just nothing you can say about it because they cannot possibly stand out as quality or as interesting as being interesting, because that's just not. Once you start with RPG Maker, you're limited in the way the visuals are going to work and the way the gameplay mechanics are going to work, and you can only go so far on that. I did watch a YouTuber video of somebody going through some RPG Maker games, some of the best ones that look very different. Things like Yumi Nikki, or Lisa was another one he mentioned, or One Shot. All of those games honestly don't even feel like they would be RPG Maker games. So there are some good ones, but if you on the first screenshot go, oh, that's an RPG Maker game, that's a number one indication that it's a garbage game, and the developers just don't have the skill or the ambition to make a good game. No Final Fantasy games are being made in RPG Maker and never have been. This bioproductive is probably nothing, but it might be something, so we'll say yes to that and put it on the fall list. Idle Gym Quest. The animation's not terrible for an idle game, but I'm still going to say no just because it's an idle game. Simply Sky doesn't look good enough. Maximus 2 Street Gladiators. Let's see if there's a Maximus 1. Well, not on Steam. There's only this Toon Shooters Freelancers. Which is more of a side-scrolling shooter game that only got 15 reviews anyways. So yeah, I don't think I would say yes to this. Also, it's a little scary to have Russian and Chinese as your top 6 language supports. There. Even when I played Castle Crushers, which this is a game that feels a little bit like that, I kind of found that a little grindy and boring, having played it once before. Not sure I'm really interested in beat 'em up games unless they have much bigger twist to them. Decks of Power, we can say no to. Where's My Cat? Looks like it's a cell phone port. That being said, I'm going to give it a chance anyways, because it might be decent. Murderous Muses looks like it's a collection of puzzles and paintings in the library, and possibly some full motion video. Interesting interface, potentially, where you're walking around paintings to see the videos of full motion video. I'd like to see how well this is received, but I heavily suspect that it's pretty bad, that the actual walking around the museum part is really just designed to waste your time, and that there is actually considerably very little full motion video, and the full motion video in almost every full motion video game are not amazing. Dark Knights with Poe and Monroe. The Infectious Madness of Dr. Decker. You can see here the Infectious Madness of Dr. Decker from 2017 has this room with this green couch, and then Poe and Monroe, also same room with same green couch, or yeah. So Talking Pictures Trilogies seems to be like that's a series. Yeah. So this is potentially the third game in the series, and maybe it struggled more because of the COVID pandemic than the 2 previous games, which I think had more elements to it. But there's an entire Da Vecchi Studios franchise on Steam, which includes Shapeshifting Detective also. So yeah, if I purchase this game, and then I would really be close to committing to playing 4 games, which that's a pretty big commitment. Moving on, Road to Divandata. Well, this is probably some Chinese no, it's Buddhist, it seems. Of course, the danger of playing something like this and being ignorant is that it may be telling a story that is very inaccurate for what the real story is, as far as the cult of the monk Devadatta, cousin and nemesis of the Buddha who betrayed and caused his descent into hell. Interesting. Yeah. Moving on, we have a game called Rusted Moss, which is a swinging shooter Metroidvania type game. We'll give that a chance. Today is Wednesday, so we should probably see a decent number of adult games, but we may not see too many. I just have that weird feeling that we might not. We can say no to this too. Caliber looks like a military first-person shooter. It is online PvP, so I won't put it on the follow list, but I will make a YouTube short on it because certainly there are other people that would try to play this. Here we have an adult game called Naked Hero, which looks to me like it is fairly blurry 3D models, low effort 3D models of a naked heroine with a sword. And it really takes the idea of a sheath on your back just floating on your back to the next level, or in this case it's actually arrows on her back and a quiver on her back just floating off the back of her back. Both as an adult game though and as a game, this is incredibly inferior looking. It's selling discounted for $1.19, and yeah, not a single screenshot there inspires any confidence. It has 16 achievements, which makes it feel like an achievement. It claims to have full audio English, but I doubt it. I doubt that's really true. I doubt there's any voice acting. Yeah, there's absolutely nothing here that would convince me or pretty much anybody to buy a low effort asset flip game like this. Oh, and I guess the next game is an adult game too, Dormitory Hentai Clicker, so I guess they're probably bundling still. In this case you have flat 2D anime girls with a very flat background shown on some of the screenshots, and then the rest of the screenshots are literally just showing a room, a dormitory, I guess is the idea. And apparently it's a clicker game, but I don't understand how the clicker game even would work. It really is just asset flip garbage too, this time with 2D anime girls instead of a 3D poor resolution model. And I would highly question whether these images were appropriately licensed. The clicking part, I guess, is there's just a bunch of objects and you're supposed to click on them to clean up the dormitory. And so they have like these life bars you click on. It literally has nothing to do with the adult content. Let's see, Wild Frost is the next game, and apparently it's mixed. This came out April 12th, 2023, and it's already mixed, so I have to assume that it's been in early access for a long time. And it's on the follow list, so I'll leave it at that. Game is too unbalanced. Art is great. The gameplay is lacking. I played the demo a few hours and enjoyed it more than the game itself. Well, I guess this game has come out of early access, but at this point, I don't think it deserves a YouTube short. And I guess this is also going to be the danger that games are going to cause for themselves, in that if they release a game as early access and I make a YouTube short around that, and then they come out of early access and people don't like the game at that point, then they're not going to get another YouTube short. Of course, what does a YouTube short mean to a game developer? For me, a YouTube short probably doesn't mean much of anything. I'll give this golfing game a chance. That being said, if my YouTube channel ever became big, or if somebody stole my idea of making YouTube shorts around video games, then I could see PewDiePie, a YouTube short from PewDiePie, highlighting a game meaning quite a lot. Let's see. Continue to jump through these games. Generic name, bold. Generic looking game. No to that. Cardboard Town looks like it's some kind of board game. Strategy board game. Next we have another adult game, Hentai Casual Jigsaw Witches, which I assume is just a jigsaw puzzle with 2D anime girls in states of nudity and undress. And if anything, the screenshots really are only highlighting one image, and it looks like overall there's probably less than 3, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, there's about 9 images, it looks like, in total. They are selling it for 99 cents, so you're paying almost a dime for a anime girl picture that you have to jigsaw puzzle to see. Well, no, it says it actually has 40 different illustrations with 90 achievements, so obviously this is an achievement game. And it's crazy that we're getting back to the point where achievement games are being a thing as a scam on Steam. It's also crazy that it's getting mixed in the adult content, where half of the adult games are also very scammy feeling already. Yeah, these scammers on Steam obviously are going to continue to just try and find new ways to scam, so that's not super surprising, but there's definitely some weirdness there where that needs to be kept on. Valve probably should keep an eye on that and try and create less of a open field for scamminess. Well, the pirates I'll give a chance to. World of Mystery. I like this image here, but the rest of this does not look good enough by any means. Mike and the Zombies is, I assume, a reference to like Michael Jackson, which maybe if this was visually polished a little bit better, I might consider that. We may be seeing the beginning of Michael Jackson being no longer a persona non grata as somebody who's been dead for a while, and we might start to see more Michael Jackson references or Michael Jackson parodies going forward. He never really lost a lot of his popularity as far as his music goes. Dino Punk. Welcome to Synth. I'll give this a chance. I'm trying to really burn through things because we've been going for 3 hours. Flooded, we'll give a chance to. Yeah, inherently, even though I've sped up some of the process of these live streams still really are going very long, and the next step to potentially improving it, the experience would be for me to look through all these games originally and just like get rid of the absolute garbage. But if I was to get rid of the absolute garbage, that would take twice as much work, if not more, and you wouldn't be presenting the garbage, so it wouldn't be presenting a real look at almost every game that comes out on Steam, which is what we're really showing right now. Is I'm letting my audience see everything and being as open as possible. I'll give this a chance. It's probably nothing. So it would be more than double the work, and it would be curating what I'm looking on top of then curating even more. Brutalism 22 looks very weird. A game like this with its weird visuals might have something artistic to say, and I really would just never give it a chance. So, but at a certain point you have to choose your medium too, like, because you will potentially lose the interest of your audience if you use the wrong medium, and in this case using ugly visuals is the wrong medium for video game stuff. Alright, so that was all the games that came out on Steam. Now we'll look at the GameDeveloper.com articles, and then we'll do some follow list coming up, and then that'll be it. Microsoft pinned that 10-year deal with EE customers, same article we already talked about. Google Play, or Google, has been fined $32 million in Korea over game exclusivity requirements. The Korean regulator, the KFTC, claims Google sought to become the dominant by preventing devs from launching titles on a rival app marketplace. I suspect Google is actually guilty of this, but I also wonder if this isn't a fine that is being issued very much to be protectionist for the Samsung Galaxy marketplace, which as an app store is pretty awful, and I don't think anybody really uses. Samsung basically owns South Korea. They have South Korea, I hate to call it a corporatocracy, but it is dangerously close to being a corporatocracy, and like the last 3 presidents have been found guilty of colluding directly with Samsung in running the whole government around that. Like, Google says it now plans to review the final decision before deciding how to respond. At some point, I wouldn't be surprised if they just pay the $32 million just to be done with it. I also wouldn't be 100% surprised if they threaten to leave Korea, South Korea in general, which that could lead to some big issues. Certainly if all of a sudden Samsung phones aren't running Android and Samsung decides to make their own operating system that's some weird competitor to iOS and Android, that would be kind of crazy. Or if Google Play Store disappears from South Korea only, that would be kind of crazy. That would definitely potentially affect my favorite lewd waifu gacha game, Destiny Child. If all of a sudden Destiny Child from a Korean company is no longer being updated or being allowed via the Google Play Store, and then I have to go try and use a different installer like TapTap to install the Google Play Destiny Child updates, that would be annoying. There already is a TapTap version that's a little less censored, but is actually more expensive and doesn't have the watch ads for free tickets, free rewards features that the Google Play Store version does. So you're best off when playing Destiny Child, the English version, is to install the Google Play Store and then install the decensoring patch, so you can watch ads to get free tickets if you want to. Moving on, let's see. Microsoft expanded PC Game Pass to a bunch of countries. We already talked about that. China's game art industry has reportedly been decimated by growing AI use. The widespread use of artificial intelligent art is reportedly diminishing the work of game artists in China, who worry about how it'll be used in other departments of game development. And arguably, while there are some decent looking like visuals from Chinese games, very often you'll see a Chinese game with very good looking 3D models and then very generic open world RPG like fighting, very much like this. There is also a pretty low bar also with some Chinese visuals too. Yeah. Inherently, though, I don't think we're quite at the point. We may only be a year or two away from it, though, where an AI art engine can make a 3D model, as much as it can only make flat 2D images. And there might very well be an order of magnitude larger amount of processing power you have to make 3D models. So the game art industry that is being decimated here is almost certainly flat 2D images of characters, which Chinese flat 2D images tended to look very similar to begin with. Unfortunately, also, this happening in China makes it even worse for those artists, because China is not going to really help anybody, any individual worker, that way. They are much happier to allow corporations to use AI artists to steal basically the concepts and the designs of other artists around the world to compete globally and internationally. They kind of don't care if a few 100,000 artists starve to death in China because they've lost work. Moving on, the National Labor Review Board says devs at the Roblox game studio GameFam can discuss pay after a complaint was filed to the National Labor Review Board. GameFam employees can talk with each other about how much they are or aren't getting paid. I don't know why this would have been even a question. I don't think any reason why you couldn't have discussed pay. Or, like, if anything, I guess this is probably just reiterating the fact that yes, you can discuss pay. You're legally required to, or no, you're legally allowed to discuss pay in the United States. That doesn't mean that if the boss hears about it, he isn't going to make some BS excuse to fire you anyways. But I don't think any kind of like non-disclosure idea or concept has ever held up in the courts, even though I imagine a lot of companies have tried to do that. So yeah, I highly recommend everybody discuss pay with their co-workers, because it will color a picture, certainly, as far as who you're working with is a better negotiator for better pay, and how the managers actually allow for wide varying different pay rates for doing the exact same jobs. Even in a temporary job, you may very quickly find that one person is working a temporary job at a different hourly rate than the other person, and there's basically no justification for why that would be. Sometimes there might be a justification that the person has like more experience or education depending on what the job is actually doing, but very often it's simply a case of one person talked to one manager, another person talked to a different manager, one person is living on one side of the city versus one person is living on a different side of the city, or something even worse, like one person is male and one person is female, and yeah, or any number of things could cause pay. That's one of the good things about union jobs in general, is that pay is very openly discussed and very much negotiated in the union contract, so you know that all the people with a certain level of seniority are getting paid the exact same amount, and there's no negotiation outside of the union contract for pay raises, so nobody is getting paid extra for any real reason. That tends in most union jobs to increase the pay for everybody instead of having one outlier person who's just a really good negotiator or somehow very on very good terms, friendly wise, with the management. But yeah, it definitely is crazy that the National Labor Review would have to say this. And we have seen a growing trend in New York and California, at least, of jobs legally being required to be posted. Companies are actively trying to post very wide ranges as far as the pay ranges on the job listings, but eventually I think the laws will crack down on that too. But yeah, going forward, I think we will start to see, in the United States at least, every job listing having to list a pay raise, the pay amount as part of the job listings. Inherently, that is a frustration for people seeking jobs and for people trying to actually hire people, is that you are getting people into the interview, wasting perhaps an hour interviewing people, and then you tell them the pay is minimum wage when it's a job that should be paying $30-40 an hour, or a salary job, and then the people just laugh them out of the room, or the people who desperately need a job are taking a job at a considerably lower amount because they've just been committed to an hour of interviewing and actually have been offered a job. Which, when you're unemployed, you do have to accept a job offer if it's given to you, if you're receiving unemployment, unless the pay is like less than a certain percentage of what your previous pay was. So it definitely, that system of unemployment is designed in almost every way to abuse and force people who've lost a job to then take a lower paying job instead of taking better paying jobs, where really, if capitalism worked for the worker, and I'm getting into an economics rant, every time you left a job or lost a job, you should be getting a better job that pays more, because you would have had more experience and be better qualified for the next job you get. But you should never be going backwards, and they sell a fantasy that you never go backwards, but plenty of people go backwards all the time, or they stay stagnant, which is just as bad because inflation is going up. Moving on, Disney taps BitHell Games for more Tron-themed titles. The next few titles from BitHell will be set in the digital universe of the Tron franchise, so they've already confirmed it. Which, okay, that's fine. We'll see how many of those they can make and how many of those will actually sell. Let's see. Aonic is getting a major stake in the Hyper Brawl tournament developer, or Milky T. So, yeah, that's a little inside baseball. We'll leave it at that. And then the Super Mario Bros. Theme becomes the first video game song to be archived by Congress. That being said, it's also worth pointing out that the DK Conga composer was not credited in the Mario movie. And so there is a small controversy around that, too. The DK Donkey Kong song. Alright, and then we'll do some flawless cleanup and then we'll be done. Dragon Ball Xenoverse here is very positive. I don't see any reason why I wouldn't put that on the wish list. Perhaps there's some deeper reason why maybe you shouldn't play Xenoverse, or you should play Xenoverse 2, or that there's another Dragon Ball game that is very similar. I don't recognize these characters, so they may be new. Part of the problem, certainly with the Dragon Ball universe, or the Dragon Ball series, is that, like, with Dragon Ball Kai kind of replacing Dragon Ball Z as being more of an abridged, streamlined story, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a Dragon Ball Kai video game out there that would tell the story a little bit more. This game seems to be set in some kind of time warped world where you're running into new characters quite a bit. And it still may very well be a case that, like, Dragon Ball Fighter Z does everything this does. And it says Dragon Ball Xenoverse XV, which I assume that's not supposed to be 15, but maybe it is. Moving on, we have a game called Draft in the Woods, which needs more time. Dr. Lively ROM and Death Edition. Overwhelmingly positive this is. So we'll put that on the wish list, even though it looks very much like a weird Russian game. You cannot get past those high reviews, though. That is a really high number of reviews. Dr. Ewan Evolution, on the other hand, has no reviews. So, or 3 reviews, so that can leave. It's also an early access from 2021. Downtown Jam is very positive. Looks like a Jet Set Radio clone, which I'll put this on the wish list now, but if the rumors of a Jet Set Radio remake, on top of rumors of a Persona 3 remake, are true, then I'm not sure I would stick with this. If anything, this might be closer to a Tony Hawk Downhill Jam game than a Jet Set Radio clone, because this may very well be around that. Just skating, yeah. This does feel much closer to Tony Hawk Downhill Jam. Down and Out is mixed, unfortunately, so it's going. Double Trouble came out on September 13th, 2022. I think we can take that off the follow list too. I'm not really sure why this would even have been on the follow list. Dots Home is very positive as a point and click adventure. It's free, so I'm going to go ahead and just put that on the wish list. Yeah, free games, certainly. You could just scour Steam for free games and find a new free game every single day. We'll give that one more time. Dwarf Romantic seems like it's overwhelmingly positive, so we'll put that on the wish list. 2. Doraemon Story of Seasons. I'm going to put this on the wish list, but I'm not 100% sure I really want to play a farming simulator game, even if it is based off of a fairly well received Doraemon series. Okay, Dots Home, we put on the wish list. Downtown Jam, we put on the wish list. Which makes this game from April 12th, the last game to come out recently, which means we are done for this stream. That's going to be it. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want to friend or follow me on any social media sites, there's a bunch of links down below. And if you want to support me further, there's a link to Patreon, or you can friend me on Steam and gift me a game off my wishlist. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.